They say you can't forget the sound of death, especially when it sings to you in the darkness. It wasn't the screams that haunted me, or the sight of my friends sinking beneath the black water. No, it was the song, sweet and hypnotic, that echoed in my mind long after the river had claimed them. A song that still calls to me, even now, in the dead of night, reminding me of the terror that lies beneath the surface. I've heard the legends about the Black River since I was a child. It's one of those places your elders warn you about with a serious look in their eyes, the kind that makes you pay attention. They tell you the stories so you don't make the same mistakes as those who came before. But when you're young, full of energy and that sense of invincibility, warnings just sound like challenges. That's why when my friends, Sunny, Emeka, and Femi, suggested we go fishing there, I didn't hesitate. It was supposed to be an adventure, a story to tell our kids one day. But what we found was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. We knew the stories about the river spirits, the Mami Wata. Everyone did. They were beautiful, enchanting beings, but also deadly. They were said to live in the river, luring men to their deaths with promises of riches or the illusion of love. But those were just tales, we thought, just old wives' tales meant to keep us from having a good time. We were men, not scared little boys. So, we packed up our fishing gear and set off one Saturday morning, laughing at our own bravado. The sun was shining, and the air was warm, making the cool shade by the riverbank even more inviting. The water was dark, almost black, but it was rich with fish, and the thought of catching enough to feed our families for days was too tempting to resist. We settled in a spot close to the edge, where the river seemed calmer. The day passed easily, with Sonny telling jokes that had us in stitches, and Emeka showing off his fishing skills. We even dared each other to swim, but none of us was foolish enough to actually jump in. The river had a presence, something heavy that made your skin prickle. But we ignored it, focusing on the good time we were having. It wasn't until dusk began to settle that we noticed something was off. The sun dipped below the horizon faster than we expected, casting long shadows across the river. The air, once warm, grew chilly, and the sounds of the forest seemed to fade into a heavy silence. It was Femi who first noticed the singing. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice low, as if speaking too loud would break something fragile. We paused, our ears straining to pick up whatever it was he heard. At first, it was just a faint hum, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But as we listened, it grew clearer, more defined. It was a woman's voice, sweet and melodic, carrying across the water with an otherworldly echo. "It's just the river," Sonny said, trying to sound confident, but there was a tremor in his voice. "No," Emeka replied, shaking his head. "That's not the river. That's Mami Wata," Femi finished, his face paling as he spoke the words we were all thinking. None of us said anything for a moment, just listening as the singing grew louder, almost beckoning. It was beautiful, I won't lie, like something out of a dream. But it was also terrifying in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if the song was reaching inside us, tugging at something deep within, something primal. "We need to go," I finally said, my voice shaking. "Now." But as I turned to gather our things, I noticed something strange. Sunny and Emeka were staring at the river, their eyes wide and glazed, as if in a trance. They were listening to the song, really listening, like they couldn't hear anything else. Femi looked at me, his face filled with fear. "Help me," he whispered, his voice breaking. We tried to pull them away, to snap them out of it, but it was like trying to move a mountain. They were rooted to the spot, their eyes fixed on the dark water, the song wrapping around them like a spell. And then, without warning, Sunny stepped forward. It happened so quickly, I barely had time to react. One moment, Sunny was standing there, and the next, he was walking towards the river, his feet moving as if on their own. Emeka followed right behind him, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were sleepwalking. "Stop!" I shouted, grabbing Sonny's arm. But he didn't even look at me. His eyes were blank, his face expressionless, as if he wasn't there anymore. "Femi, help me!" I screamed, but Femi was already at Emeka's side, trying to pull him back. But it was no use. They were stronger than us, unnaturally strong, and they moved with a determination that scared the hell out of me. The closer they got to the river, the louder the singing became, until it was all I could hear, drowning out everything else. And then, they were in the water. They walked straight in, fully clothed, without hesitation. The river swallowed them up, the black water rippling around them as they disappeared beneath the surface. The singing stopped, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the dark, still water and the pounding of my heart in my ears. And then, the water erupted. They came out of the river like nightmares made flesh. Beautiful, yes, but in the way that a storm is beautiful just before it tears everything apart. Their hair was long and dark, their skin smooth and glistening like wet stones. But their eyes were cold, empty, like bottomless pits that sucked the warmth out of the air. Mami Wata. The legends were true. They surrounded Sonny and Emeka, their hands reaching out to caress their faces, their lips moving in a silent song that I could still hear in my mind. The men didn't struggle. They didn't scream. They just stood there, staring into those dead eyes, as if they belonged to them now. And then, one by one, they began to sink. It was slow, almost gentle, like they were being pulled down by invisible hands. The water closed over their heads, and they were gone. The spirits watched them go, their faces expressionless, before turning their gaze on us. I've never felt fear like that before, the kind that freezes you to the spot, that makes your mind scream at you to run but leaves your body paralyzed. I wanted to move, to grab Femi and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare into those eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, and wait for the end. But it didn't come. One of the spirits tilted her head, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. She reached out towards me, her fingers brushing against my cheek, and I felt a cold so deep it burned. "Go," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of leaves. "Tell them what you saw." And just like that, the spell was broken. I could move again, breathe again. But I didn't wait to question it. I grabbed Femi, who was still staring at the water in shock, and we ran. We ran like the devil himself was on our heels, not stopping until we were far, far away from that cursed river. We made it back to the village just as the first light of dawn was breaking. But the relief I felt was short-lived. The villagers knew something was wrong the moment they saw us. Maybe it was the look in our eyes, or the way we were shaking uncontrollably. They gathered around us, demanding to know what happened, but all I could do was stare at them, my mind replaying the horrors I'd witnessed over and over again. Femi was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. He told them everything, about the singing, about Sonny and Emeka, about the spirits. The elders listened, their faces growing grimmer with every word. When he was done, they looked at each other, then back at us, their eyes filled with pity. "They're gone," one of the elders said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The river has claimed them." "But why didn't it take us?" Femi asked, his voice breaking. "Why did it let us go?" The elder shook his head. "The river spirits are fickle. Sometimes they take, sometimes they spare. But those who escape are never the same." He was right. Femi and I were never the same after that night. The village tried to help us, tried to make us forget, but you don't forget something like that. The memory clings to you like a shadow, always there, always reminding you of what you saw, of what you lost. Femi tried to move on, to pretend that life could go back to normal, but he couldn't. The guilt ate at him, the nightmares haunted him. It wasn't long before he left the village, saying he couldn't bear to stay so close to the river. I never saw him again. As for me, I stayed. But the river was never far from my mind. I'd wake up at night, sweating and shaking, the sound of that curse singing echoing in my ears. I stopped fishing, stopped going near the water altogether. The other villagers understood. They left me alone, gave me space, but I could see the fear in their eyes when they looked at me, like they thought I was cursed. Maybe I was. Years passed, but the memory never faded. I'd see the river in my dreams, dark and endless, the spirits waiting just beneath the surface. Sometimes, I'd hear the singing, soft and distant, but always there, always calling. I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to return, to finish what had started that night. I resisted for as long as I could. But there comes a point when the fear of living with the memory is worse than the fear of facing it again. So, one night, I went back. It was just as I remembered it, dark and silent, the water like black glass reflecting the moonlight. I stood on the bank, staring out at the river, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, the singing started. It was softer this time, almost soothing, like a lullaby. But I knew better. I knew what lay beneath that beautiful sound. Still, I didn't move. I couldn't. Something held me there, something I couldn't explain, like an invisible hand pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then I saw them. They rose out of the water like before, their bodies glistening in the moonlight, their eyes fixed on me. But this time, they weren't alone. Sonny and Emeka were with them. My heart stopped at the sight of them. They looked the same, but different. Their eyes were empty, just like the spirits, their faces expressionless. They were no longer the friends I had known, but something else, something cold and dead. They didn't speak or move. They just stood there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to join them. And for a moment, I almost did. The water called to me, its black surface rippling invitingly. I took a step forward, and then another, the singing growing louder, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, the darkness wrapping around me like a blanket. But then, something stopped me. It was a memory, a flash of the life I had before, the life I had almost forgotten. The laughter, the warmth, the love of the people I cared about. It was faint, like a whisper, but it was enough. I stepped back, shaking my head, breaking free from the spell. The spirits' eyes narrowed, their faces twisting in anger. The singing grew louder, more frantic, but I didn't let it take hold this time. I turned and ran as fast as I could, away from the river, away from the spirits, away from the darkness that had almost claimed me. I never went back to the Black River after that night. The village elders say I was lucky, that the spirits spared me for reasons we'll never understand. But I don't feel lucky. I feel haunted. The memory of that night, of my friends, of the river, it's something I carry with me every day. I see it in my dreams, in the shadows, in the quiet moments when I'm alone. It's a part of me now, a part one can never escape. But I've learned to live with it, to accept that some things are beyond our understanding, beyond our control. The Black River is one of those things. It's a place of power, a place where the line between life and death is thin, where the spirits of the past still linger. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I can still hear the singing. But I never listen. Because I know what waits beneath the surface. And I know that if I ever go back, I won't come out again. The village still tells the story of the Black River ghost, of the men who disappeared that night, and the one who came back. They say it's a warning, a reminder of the power of the river, of the spirits that dwell there. But for me, it's not just a story. It's my life, my reality, my curse. And so I tell it, not to scare, but to warn. Because some places are best left alone, some mysteries are better left unsolved. And the Black River is one of them. If you ever find yourself near it, remember my story. Remember what happened to Sonny and Emeka. And for your own sake, if you hear the singing, don't listen. Because once you do, there's no turning back.